Welcome to the session on parasympathetic nervous system. The specific learning objectives of the session are to outline the components of the parasympathetic nervous system, to enumerate the craniosacral the cranial nerves having parasympathetic activity, to list the peripheral parasympathetic ganglia, to describe the sacral parasympathetic outflow, and to identify its target organs. Now, the autonomic nervous system includes both the sympathetic as well as the parasympathetic nervous system, and both of these are primarily antagonistic in their function, meaning they work in opposition to each other. The primary functions of the parasympathetic nervous system include constriction of the pupil, whereas that of the sympathetic nervous system is that it brings about the dilatation of the pupil. The parasympathetic nervous system also brings about bronchoconstriction, and it is concerned with the inhibition of cardiac excitation, the conduction of the nerve impulses of the heart, and the contraction of the heart. It also is concerned with the increased secretion of the respiratory and the digestive glands, and it helps in the contraction of the urinary bladder and inhibition of the internal urethral sphincter. It also brings about the increased motility of the gastrointestinal tract and inhibition of the pyloric and the anal sphincters. It also brings about the erection of the penis. So primarily the parasympathetic nervous system brings the system of the bodies to rest, except the gastrointestinal tract and the genitourinary system. Whereas the sympathetic nervous system is that of which is primarily said to be the system of flight or fight. The parasympathetic nervous system is said to have a craniosacral outflow, whereas the sympathetic nervous system is said to have a thoracolumbar outflow. Now, what does this primarily mean? The craniosacral outflow means that the system emerges from the brain and from the sacral segments of the spinal cord. Now, from where exactly from the brain does these nerves emerge? They emerge from the brainstem, and the brainstem includes the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla. So in the midbrain, the parasympathetic nerves, they emerge from a nucleus called the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, and in the pons there are two nucleus. One is called the lacrimatory nucleus and the other is called the superior salivatory nucleus. And in the medulla, you have the inferior salivatory nucleus and the dorsal nucleus of the vagus nerve. So all these are the nucleus in the brainstem. And from the spinal cord, you have the S2 to the S3 sacral segments. These are the spinal segments from which the sacral components of the parasympathetic nerves emerge. The peripheral parasympathetic ganglia include the ciliary, otic, the pterygopalatine, and the submandibular ganglia. These are the four peripheral parasympathetic ganglia present in the head and neck. Now we'll see each of these ganglia in detail. Now this Edinger-Westphal nucleus is present in the midbrain. So the preganglionic parasympathetic fibers from the Edinger-Westphal nucleus, they pass through the oculomotor nerve and its lower division, and then they reach the ciliary ganglia. And in the ciliary ganglia, they relay. And from the ciliary ganglia, the postganglionic parasympathetic fibers, they pass through the short ciliary nerves and they supply the sphincter pupillae and the ciliary muscles. Next comes the submandibular ganglia. This submandibular ganglia, now this is the superior salivatory nucleus, and the fibers, the preganglionic parasympathetic fibers, they pass through the seventh cranial nerve or the facial nerve and its cauda tympani branch. Now these preganglionic parasympathetic fibers, they join the lingual nerve, which is a branch of the mandibular nerve, and then they reach the submandibular ganglia wherein they relay. And from the submandibular ganglia, the postganglionic parasympathetic fibers, they reach the submandibular gland and the sublingual gland. Next, we have the otic ganglia. Now, here the preganglionic parasympathetic fibers, they emerge from the inferior salivatory nucleus. They pass through the ninth nerve, that is the glossopharyngeal nerve, and its branch, the lesser petrosal nerve, to reach the otic ganglia, where they relay. And from the otic ganglia, the postganglionic parasympathetic fibers pass through the auriculotemporal nerve, which is a branch of the mandibular nerve, to reach the parotid gland. Coming to the pterygopalatine ganglia. Now, here the preganglionic parasympathetic fibers arise from the superior salivatory nucleus and the lacrimatory nucleus, and they pass through the seventh cranial nerve and its branch, the greater petrosal nerve, to reach the pterygopalatine ganglia, which is attached or to the maxillary nerve, right? So functionally, this pterygopalatine ganglia, though it is related to the seventh cranial nerve, topographically it is closely related only to the maxillary nerve. That is, it is attached to the maxillary nerve. And from the pterygopalatine ganglia, the postganglionic parasympathetic fibers, they go and supply the lacrimal gland, the nasal cavity, the nasopharynx, and the palate. So this was about the cranial outflow. And apart from this cranial outflow, there is also a nucleus which is called the dorsal nucleus of the vagus nerve. Now here the fibers from here, they relay in the ganglionic cells in the autonomic plexus of the thorax and the abdomen. And from there, the postganglionic parasympathetic fibers, they supply the bronchus, the heart, and even in the abdomen, the stomach and the small intestine. And lastly, coming to the pelvic splanchnic nerves. So these pelvic splanchnic nerves, they arise from the sacral segments of the spinal cord, that is S2 to S4, from their lateral horns. And then what they do is they reach the parasympathetic ganglia, which are located within the wall of the pelvic organs, or which are present very close to it. And from there, the postganglionic parasympathetic nerves, they reach their target organs such as the large intestine, the urinary bladder, and the genitals. So thank you. So this was about the parasympathetic nervous system.